Welcome, I'm Arnar from Quad Studio and I'm gonna show you the basics of Blender. Now this is the first video in a series that will take you through the process of creating an art exhibition in 3D. These videos can be viewed independently and the project files for each video is available for you to download. My own background is in visual arts and these videos are oriented towards that process. The process of organizing, creating, curating and communicating ideas for artworks in the context of an exhibition space. There is no need to know anything about 3D modeling before you watch this. This is for complete beginners. So I hope you just enjoy, but make sure that you have a decent computer and a 3-button mouse, because that's kind of important for the process. But yeah, without further ado, let's just dive right in. The first thing that you probably want to do is to move around. You can do that by holding down the middle mouse button. Then you orbit. If you hold down Shift and the middle mouse button, you pan like this. And if you use the scroll wheel, you can move in and out of your scene. These actions can also be found up here in the right corner of your 3D viewport. If you don't see these, make sure that you have this option enabled. The top one, the colorful gizmo there, is the orbiting. You can just left click and sort of drag in anywhere like on this gizmo. And the magnifying glass is to move in and out, and the hand is the panning action. So there are also some more views we want to go through now, but to do that, make sure that you go to Edit and Preferences, and you go to the Input option here, and you emulate numpad. However, if you do have a numpad, you may not need to do this, but I'm really used to this. I'm using a laptop with no numpad, so I'm doing this. Emulate numpad. Save preferences. If you don't see this button here, it might be inside this menu. So you save the preferences, so now Blender will remember this next time you open up the software. Now, what you can do is you press 1 on the keyboard to go to front view. 3 is side view and 7 is top view. 1, 3 and 7. You can orbit out of them just by holding down the middle mouse button. So these are also really powerful ways of looking at your scene. Another quick way to focus on objects instead of sort of slowly making your way to the object and putting into focus is to go to the view menu, but make sure that your object is selected, in this case my cube, and then go to frame selected. That will basically just put that object into the center of your pivot, like sort of pivot point. Perfect. Also notice that I have already assigned a new shortcut to this action, and I recommend you do the same. If you have a numpad, again, you don't need to do that because by default it is the period or the comma key on the numpad which does this. But if you don't have a numpad, go to this option here, right click on it and say change shortcut, and then you press comma on the keyboard. So now if you select an object like the light up there, you can just press comma and that becomes the center of your focus. We can take a look at the viewport shading. That's the options up here, these globes. The first one is the wireframe, second is solid, third is material preview, that just adds a bit more information into your scene, and the third one is a full rendered preview. So they are always sitting up there in the top right corner of your 3D viewport. The first two, the wireframe and the solid view, they have also the option of enabling X-ray vision. So now if I take a look at my cube, left click to select it, comma to put it into frame, you can see that now it's sort of a bit transparent because I have the X-ray enabled, and if I disable it, it just becomes completely solid. Same with wireframe, it sort of seems to be solid now, and if I press the X-ray, I can see the whole geometry of it. So I'm going to stick to the solid view, and I'm going to open this drop-down menu here, which is sitting on the right side there, and I'm going to look at the matcap options and choose one of these globes. Whoops. And you can see that it will drastically change the look of your cube, but it is not affecting in any way how it is rendered out. It is simply just a viewport sort of preference. I like to use this one here because it has a bit of like a cold and a warm light from two different directions. So that's the viewport shading. But now how do we move things around and rotate them and scale them? That is quite simple. We have the toolbar here on the left side. If you don't see this, you might just have to press T on the keyboard. That's sort of T for toolbar. And you have a move tool, rotation, and scale tool. So you can see that those gizmos, they are sort of like changing from arrows to circles to handles. And the fourth one down here is just all three in one. And you can use these by quite intuitively just pull these arrows. And you can see those little planes that exist between them. They will move the object on just those two axes. So that is handy if you, for example, if you have placed something on the floor and you want to move it further away, but you don't want to go through the floor. So you can just then click on the blue plane there, and then we'll just move it on those two axes. If you want to move something with more precision, you can open up the sidebar with pressing N, and then you have all these values here. So now we can see that we have changed the location, not the rotation or the scale, but just the location. Quite random numbers here. So you can just type in numbers like 2 and 0 and 1, for example. And now we know that that is the exact location of this cube. And now if I go to my top view by pressing 7, you can also see that the grid floor is in the same units, so we can see that it sits perfectly sort of in that spot, right? But I want to show you the shortcuts. So I'm not going to go into the rotation and scaling tools. I want to put the toolbar on the select tool, and I'm going to press T to hide the toolbar, because I'm only going to be using shortcuts for these tools. So the shortcut for the move tool is G, so it's G for grabbing. So if you have your cube selected and you press G, the cube will just follow the cursor. But I want to move it with more precision. So I want to say that I want to move it on the x-axis, which is the red line, and I just type in X on the keyboard and then a number value of, let's say, 5. That means that now I moved the cube 5 meters on the x-axis. If I'm planning to move it the other way on the x-axis, I'll just have to type in minus and then enter. So basically, you can sort of type in these, this path. So it has to do with like all of the tools. So it's G to move, R to rotate, and S to scale. So if I want to rotate the cube 15 degrees on the y-axis, I would just have to have the cube selected, activate the rotation by pressing R, and then lock it to the axis, which is Y, and then type in 1 and 5, and then enter. Same with scaling, that's S, and then 2, and enter. And now I've scaled it up twice on each sort of edge. So it's actually more like, volume-wise, I think it's more like 8 times bigger. But you can see also the scale has changed to 2, and the dimensions are now 4 by 4 by 4. If I want to go back to the original sized cube, I can simply just hover over the scale value and press backspace. That works with all of the different boxes here. I can just hover over the rotation. It doesn't matter which field it is. I just have to be over one of the rotation fields and hit backspace, and that will neutralize all of them. And same with location, backspace. So this is a short introduction to the transformation tools. So now I would like to show you how to add objects into our scene and delete. You can delete objects by just left clicking on them and then pressing X and then delete. I'm going to do that to my light because that's actually a thing that I'm not going to be using. We are going to be using the camera and the cube. So you can delete things by just pressing X and then choosing delete. To add objects, you can do Shift A. That brings up the add menu, which also lives up here if you're not using shortcuts. So Shift A, And I want to add in not a mesh object. The mesh object is like the cube. I want to add in a meta ball. So you see that it gets spawned or created in the middle of our cube. So we need to move it up. And now we know how to. So G and set. And just pull it up. I'm not going to do this really precisely because I just wanted to hover over the cube. Something like this. And I want to scale it down. So I press S to scale it down and just move it in a bit. Something like this. And then I want to show you or introduce you to another tool, a shortcut, which is Shift D. That's duplicate. So I'm gonna move this and I'm making like an abstract sculpture here. So precision is not of any interest to me at the moment. I'm scaling it down a bit. And I'm gonna do Shift D again. And just sort of move it that way. Maybe Shift D again. Just make some kind of a weird shape out of this. So the metaballs, they sort of connect in this way that they create these connections to do with distance, right? So it's fun objects to play with when it comes to sculpting. I'm gonna say this is the final shape, a beautiful sculpture. You can also see in the outliner that now we have 4 metaballs. Normally I would tell you to name things properly, but we are gonna combine them into one object by just clicking on the shape itself, going to the metaball properties, which is that green icon, changing the resolution here from the top resolution from 0.4 to maybe 0.004. The render resolution, we don't need to change that. We can just keep that one. You can see that it became way more smooth. And now I want to go to Object, and I will go to Convert to, and Mesh from Curve Meta Surf Text. And now you can see that all these controllers around them disappeared. And in the outliner, we just have one shape here. And I'm going to rename that. I'm going to double click on that name there. And I want to rename that just Sculpture. All right. From my front view, by pressing 1, I'm going to hit G with my sculpture selected. So I kind of center it. Just going by eye, no precision here. I'm pressing 3 to go to that side view. 7 top view, so I can see that it's quite centered. Perfect. And now as a last step, I want to go into the material preview, and with my object, my sculpture selected, I want to choose that second to last tab there. It's the material properties, and with it selected, I want to click on new. And then you get all these options here, and you should see this. If you don't, that might be because the surface options are not sort of open. And I want to change the base color. I want to also pull this edge. You can also see that you can sort of change the size of these areas by just dragging these borders. So I'm just doing that so we can actually see the names of these fields here. So the base color is white. If you click into the field, you can change the color of it. You also have the RGB and the hex code to sort of help you with inserting codes for colors. And in this shading option here, the color option, we will go more into this in another video. You also have the metallic. So if you put that to the max, it will sort of get this metallic look. And the roughness, if you take it all the way down, you see it becomes completely reflective. And now it's reflecting sort of a environment that is built into Blender. So I may not want to see that necessarily, so I can just make it slightly less reflective. So something like this. I'm quite happy with that. Just playing with the metallic and the roughness. That's the only thing I'm playing with at the moment. So now we have created our first abstract sculpture with a texture that we can view in the material preview.